Facts. If we were to sell that energy back to the power grid the same way I sell solar energy, what would we get?
We will wait for a few minutes. Let few others join.
I'm already here. I'm here.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Just we will wait for a few more patients and then we'll start. Couple of minutes.
Yeah, I'm very happy to work with you. Yeah. No, and I have time today, so it's okay.
Okay. Just 2-3 minutes.
Everybody, those who are here, it's nice to have you here. I hope the lockdown is not too traumatic.
Yes.
Hi. It's so nice to see you, Ruchita.
I know, so nice to see you.
I'm so happy to have you log in. So
How are you?
Very
Yeah,
good, busy. For the, I mean, I have a dual life, you know. So Arman is very busy. So we've been actually working with the government to send voice calls off to, you know, health workers on COVID and then the virtual.
I think we can start. So
Okay.
today we have as our guest speaker Dr. Aparna Hegde. Thank you very much, ma'am, for coming, for agreeing to come for this webcast. So today, Dr. Hegde would basically talk about the urogynecological aspect of IC. So, ma'am, would you like to start by giving an introduction, or you want to directly take the questions?
I can do it either ways. What is better for you?
I think you can just start, just give us a brief, like how is urogynecology different from urology and and gynecology? If you can just give us a brief.
Yeah, that's an important point. Yeah, that's an important point. And why bladder pain syndrome? I don't like the term IC. Bladder pain syndrome patients should be seen by urogynecologists, right? So, urogynecology is a field which is actually which looks at the pelvic floor as one. You know, medical science has artificially divided our pelvic floor into 3 different parts, right? Urology, gynecology, and colorectal. Now, actually, when damage happens to the pelvic floor, it doesn't decide to only impact the gynac part or the urology part or the colorectal part. There are many conditions, and one of the conditions is the bladder pain syndrome condition, which impact. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
So, many conditions which impact the pelvic floor affect all parts equally, literally, or it might affect the gynac part a little more, urology part a little less, or the colorectal part. So there are combinations of conditions that happen. Now, when you go to urologist, he or she will only know the urological part, will not be able to assess the pelvic floor issue. When you go to gynecologist, they might know a little bit of the pelvic floor, but not how the urological and the colorectal parts coincide and work together, right? You go to a colorectal person, they will not know the other 2 parts in front of them. And so patients end up running from doctor to doctor, trying to understand what's going wrong with them, right? And bladder pain syndrome is one condition which, you know, really affects all parts, literally. So you could have a pelvic floor issue, you will have a bladder issue that may also be associated with a colorectal issue. And then you are just running from here to there because each one is doing only their focused area and the collective is not understood. So urogynecology is a field which helps you understand the pelvic floor as one. Right. So I will give an example of bladder pain syndrome where, you know, when you have inflammation of the bladder, it leads to spasm on the pelvic floor, right? Because imagine if your thumb is inflamed, right? And then all the muscles around the thumb also will, you know, become going to a little bit of spasm. So people who have dysfunctional voiding can also have bladder pain syndrome can also have dysfunctional voiding, meaning what happens is that there's pain, so they spasm up, and so they're not able to pass urine properly. Or many women with bladder pain syndrome may be having concomitant irritable bowel syndrome. It's known to go together with it, right? So it's something that urologists won't understand. So it's very important for these conditions like bladder pain syndrome, prolapse. Prolapse means organs coming down, organs descending through the vagina because of lack of pelvic support. Or incontinence. Incontinence can be the urine incontinence, which is leaking of urine, or fecal incontinence, which is leaking of feces, right? Or you could have fistula, which is like a improper connection formed between either the bladder and the vagina or the anal canal and the vagina. All of these conditions can actually affect all the pelvic floor components. And that's why you need to come to urogynecologist for this and not go to urologist or a gynecologist or a colorectal surgeon. And that's in short what urogynecology is. We understand the pelvic floor as one.
My next question is, suppose if somebody is getting recurring UTI, what should be done for that? Is it always IC, or recurring UTI is a completely different disease? Because often most of us, yes.
Yeah, so most of you, So I get a lot of patients of recurrent UTI. Now, recurrent UTI, I mean, if you go by the symptoms of recurrent UTI, right? So they often mimic those of bladder pain syndrome, right? Now, when you have recurrent UTI, it actually could be 3 different conditions happening. Either it could be proper recurrent UTI. So you get women who have recurrent UTI, meaning what is recurrent UTI? You have 2 episodes of UTI in 6 months or 3 episodes in 1 year, right? So this is recurrent UTI, and women may be suffering from that alone. Or you may have women who have misdiagnosed recurrent UTI. They're actually bladder pain syndrome, stroke IC, but because the symptoms mimic that of UTI, they've been called recurrent UTI. Every time they go to urologist, they'll just say, okay, symptoms, and they'll treat you and they'll tell you it's recurrent UTI, but actually it's bladder pain syndrome. But you also have a third category of patients I see over and over again who have a combination. Because what happens is it may start off as recurrent UTI, but any infection can leave behind an inflammation, right? So imagine if you have an injury of your hand, right? Suppose your thumb gets injured, and you kind of do apply medication to it, and the injury will go off, and your skin might come back to normal. But repeatedly in the same area, if you have injury, right, it might leave behind some inflammation. The infection is off, but the inflammation remains. Correct? So it's something similar to the bladder. If a bladder is infected over and over again, it can get inflamed, and the inflammation may remain behind. She may get another episode of UTI superimposed on it. So these are patients who have combination of UTI and bladder wall inflammation. Correct? Now, you must understand one very important thing is that unfortunately in India, finding that out clearly is sometimes difficult because urine testing is done very badly. Right? I mean, one of the worst diagnostics in the country is urine routine microscopy and culture. Correct? People do not know how to, women do not know how to give a urine sample, and labs don't consider it something to be done properly because done day in and day out. So women may not give urine correctly, right? So they may not do a correct midstream sample. Right? What is midstream sample? I'm sure all of you know, but just to kind of,
Yes, please just, I'm just asking you, explain how should a woman give her urine sample?
Exactly. So what's the meaning of a midstream sample? A midstream sample means that when you go to pee, separate your legs properly, separate your labia, correct? Start, and then you clean up. Actually, if you have an alcohol swab, it's great. Otherwise, wash clearly with water. Start passing urine. Do not collect the first part. Collect the next part, because the first part will kind of clean off the urethra, and all the vagina and the impurities will go off, and the middle part should be collected because that is the correct urine sample. Now that is the way you have to collect it, right? Now the problem, however, is if you are obese, right? If you're obese and you have a lot of folds in the vulva or the vagina, it's very difficult to collect a good midstream sample, because no matter what you do, it will have contaminants from the vagina, because you have a lot of vulval folds, there will be contamination from there. Second thing, so in older women and sometimes even younger women, I tend to take a straight bladder sample, especially if they come, repeated episodes of UTI. You want to kind of take a sample directly from the bladder to be sure, that you're taking the bladder sample. Now, when you collect the urine, it is very important not to collect it at home and then expect them to come and pick it up. That's a very bad thing, because when they come from the collection center, pick it up, then they go back to the collection center, which might be just one small room somewhere. And then from there, they send it off to the main lab. The testing will get done 5-6 hours later. It's all wrong then. Ideally, you should go to a collection center yourself and give urine sample there. and tell them to actually give you the urine routine microscopy report in the first 2 hours. They should be actually doing the microscopy within 2 hours of collection, which doesn't get done. And so many times what happens is that the reports go all wrong, right? So, and so generally when a patient comes to me and is giving me a very clear history of, UTI, I assume sometimes it's UTI plus inflammation until it's proven otherwise. And can I talk about the urine routine report also? I just want to tell you few things about urine routine. Yeah, somebody asked a question. Somebody's asking a question?
Oh, no.
Yeah. The urine routine microscopy report. Now, there's a lot of controversy over the report, right? The first thing you have to look for in the report is pus cells. For me, pus cells is much more important than culture. People just come to me with culture. Culture is secondary. First, look at the pus cells, right? If you have more than normally in India, they do uncentrifuged samples. Normally, when you get the urine, they test it directly. Many labs internationally would centrifuge it. When you centrifuge it, meaning you make it concentrated, then you can even if you have 2 pus cells, that's significant. But most labs in India, so you take it for granted, they're not centrifuging the urine sample, and they're testing it under the microscope. So in such case, you should have at least 10 pus cells per high power field. Less than 10 pus cells per high power field either tells me the testing has not been done correctly, or she may not be having UTI, right? So first thing I look at is pus cells. Then I will look at the nitrites. Correct. So what nitrites is, what happens is that when you have, most commonly it's E. coli, Enterobacteriaceae, which causes urinary tract infection. And when E. coli is there, it converts nitrates in the urine to nitrites. So that you get so if you have an infection by E. coli, you're likely to get nitrites positive. Correct. So, and then another thing called leukocyte esterase. If you see the report, they will have leukocyte esterase. What is leukocyte esterase? It's simple. Leukocyte is WBC, the white blood cell. When there is an infection, the white blood cell is going to break open and it's going to release the esterases, right? So that is what is picked up, leukocyte esterase. So you can also look at the leukocyte esterase. Now, how do I use all of this together? Now, pus cells for me is very significant. Nitrite is important in the terms of, if nitrite is positive, then it's very likely it's an infection, because you're not going to get nitrite positive unless you have an infection. But if nitrite is negative, it does not mean there is no infection. Why? Because there is one kind of bacteria called Staphylococcus saprophyticus, which does not cause nitrite positive. Are you with me? Meaning, if you have it positive, it means it's an infection. But if you have it negative, it doesn't necessarily mean there's no infection, because Staph saprophyticus will not give you nitrite positive. Look, if you look at leukocyte esterase, if it's positive, it may be infection, but there are many other reasons for getting leukocyte esterase positive. Like your white blood cells can break down because of many reasons. Correct? So you may have a lot of false positives, right? So like there are many other reasons for it. So that's why I use together all three. Pus cells most important, then nitrites, and then leukocyte esterase. So any lab that's not giving you nitrite, that's not giving you leukocyte esterase, and is giving you a report very late, does not know how to do urine routine testing. Please remember that. It's very difficult for me to convince all labs to do it correctly. Culture comes 3 days later. For me, culture is just a confirmatory thing. But if the pus cells are positive, I will start the treatment,
Urine routine is more important than urine culture.
Yes. For me, the pus cells part of urine routine microscopy is the most important part of the test that you do.
Even if there are like 3 pus cells, even that is...
No, I told you, right? In pus cells, it is very important to look at the count of pus cells. In most Indian labs, they don't centrifuge the urine sample, meaning they don't make it concentrated, they don't kind of spin it. So if you unspin urine, just urine taken and seen under the microscope, you have to have at least 10. Correct? So in India, most labs, you have to look at as 10 and above. Now, having said that, it's a range, right? If it's 9, doesn't mean that, I will look at everything. For me, first is symptoms, then it's pus cells. You're getting my point, right? Like if you have symptoms, and then pus cells, right? So pus cells, if you have symptoms, very florid symptoms, and your pus cells are 9 to 10, I will consider it significant. But if you have florid infection, florid symptoms, and your pus cells around 6, I might still think, oh, something is wrong there, you know. Hello, I couldn't hear you.
How important is cystoscopy
Hello?
after this? Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Cystoscopy, right? I couldn't hear you.
And I'm saying, how important is cystoscopy? Is it going to be the next step, or how do you go about cystoscopy?
Yeah. So see, the thing is this: if you look at bladder pain syndrome, so I like the term, and I would like everybody who's a part of this to call it bladder pain syndrome, and not interstitial cystitis. That's, you know, even your
Because
website,
ESIC is also renaming it as bladder pain syndrome, and interstitial cystitis is not really anymore the term they want to use.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I need this, all the people here, it's important to know this, right? 1 second, I'll just open my door. My internet connection, something is wrong. 1 second. Yeah, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
So, firstly, I will tell you that please call it bladder pain syndrome. Why? Because interstitial cystitis is just a very small part of the entire spectrum. Okay, when you say interstitial cystitis, it only means the bladder wall changes you see in cystoscopy. Okay, so now I would like, now I'll come to cystoscopy. I just want to, this particular one point I really want to emphasize to all, you know, all the people here, that please call it bladder pain syndrome. And why am I saying this? Because syndrome, the meaning of syndrome is collection of symptoms. Correct. It's not a disease. How do I explain to you? Like, you know, I mean, the syndrome becomes a spectrum, like from mild symptoms to like major symptoms. The syndrome is not definition of a disease. It's like a collection of symptoms together. So if you have a collection of symptoms, which is urgency, frequency, and any discomfort in the bladder, I will consider that you may be having bladder pain syndrome, which is lasting for more than 6 weeks. Now, where does cystoscopy come in this, right? Cystoscopy is going to tell me the bladder wall changes, correct? Now, if a woman comes with florid symptoms, right? So I have ruled out UTI, or I think that along with UTI, she also has some amount of, you know, inflammation, and the symptoms are florid. I like to do cystoscopy because it tells me a lot about how much the bladder wall is inflamed, correct? Because a lot of the symptoms are coming from the inflammation of the bladder, and it tells me how, like how strong my, see, if you realize, all of you who are here today know that the treatment of bladder pain syndrome is not a specific, it's not one size fits all. I will not do for B patient what I do for A patient, right? I'll be like, I might hit the condition very hard for one patient, may not hit it as hard for another patient, correct? So cystoscopy gives me an idea of how your bladder wall is. Is it very inflamed? Because the inflammation of the bladder is responsible for a lot of the symptoms of bladder pain syndrome, right? So if you have significant symptoms and UTI has been ruled out, I would like to do cystoscopy in you. The only reason where I will not do it first is when you have milder symptoms, right? Very mild symptoms, and it's very iffy, and you may be having, say, for example, a shorter history. I might give you some, you know, anti-inflammatory agents, some painkillers to see if, you know, it kind of ties off with that. But if it does not, I would like to do cystoscopy, because then the bladder installation bit comes in, right? Now, earlier guidelines put cystoscopy as third line. But if you look at the latest 2019 guidelines, it's clearly written that if you have significant symptoms and the symptoms are lasting for more than 6 weeks and UTI has been ruled out, you should do cystoscopy, because it really gives you a lot of clues about what to do.
And could you also talk about a bit about cystoscopy with hydrodistension?
Yeah. So I'll tell you one thing very important, you know, and I have discussed this with Ruchika multiple times, you know, that cystoscopy also depends upon who does it, right? Cystoscopy for bladder pain syndrome is very different from regular cystoscopy. In regular cystoscopy, I will just go in, I don't need that much distension, I will just see and come out. But in bladder pain syndrome, what I find, and this is also something that, you know, when you keep on treating patients with bladder pain syndrome, you see this. What you find is that as you distend the bladder, so I tend to kind of, you know, distend the bladder, and then again take out some fluid and then re-distend. What I find is that the inflammation comes out, hypervascularity, the petechial hemorrhages, all of them become more prominent when you distend and you kind of, again, empty the bladder. I find that, the hypervascularity, the petechial hemorrhages, meaning, the bleeding spots in the bladder, all of those features of bladder pain syndrome become more prominent that way. Now, what is hydrodistension, right? So what is hydrodistension? Hydrodistension is where what they have found is that if you distend the bladder to its capacity, correct? And when I say distend the bladder to capacity, not under force. In cystoscopy of bladder pain syndrome, I am not using a lot of force to put in the fluid. I do it with a normal IV set. At normal, I just put the IV fluid, at a height so that by its natural gravity, the fluid go into the bladder and distend the bladder, right? And when I fill up the capacity, naturally what will happen is the fluid will stop flowing. Okay, like when you keep on filling it up, a point will come because the bladder is over distended and come to capacity, its functional capacity. What it will do is the fluid automatically stop, and that's the point of capacity under obviously anesthesia, and I will keep it distended for 4 minutes. Now, why do I do that? Because there is evidence which shows that when you distend the bladder naturally to the capacity and keep it distended for some time, it can blunt some of the P receptors. There are some P, there's P fibers. Those are involved in pain response, and it can blunt them. So hydrodistension helps with that. So what I tend to do is this, is that if I'm doing cystoscopy in a patient, I would hydrodistend, because I'm anyway doing cystoscopy. Hydrodistension is known to be symptomatically useful for women. It works for some time. So we would hydrodistend at that point.
Arun has a question. Arun? Hello, Arun?
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I can hear you.
No. Is there any particular protocol you follow that when a patient comes to you, is there a particular step that you follow that first? Like if I tell about myself, mine was for 3 years, I was given oral medication. I didn't respond much to that. Then we did hydrodistension. That helps me in the frequency and all. But it doesn't help with the pain. Then we proceeded to Botox for frequency. It helped somewhat, but didn't help with the pain.
Yes. It's a very important question you've asked me. What I found with bladder pain syndrome, and this is something that I must say, and some of my patients know this. What I found with bladder pain syndrome treatment is that if you do one thing and do not do the other things, it does not work. So what you got is very piecemeal treatment. Okay, now what happens with bladder pain syndrome is there are different things in action, right? Now, we don't know the inflammatory agent body produces that causes bladder pain syndrome. That has not been discovered. Now, the only thing we are doing is to act on the already existing inflammation. What we're trying to do is prevent ingestion of foods that will cause that will worsen the inflammation, and try to build the bladder wall, right? Try to give it some kind of nutrition and build the bladder wall. So from your history, it looks like you had piecemeal treatment, right? You had a few medication. I'm sure the medication was something like Atarax or some anti-inflammatory agents, some painkillers, or they must have given you pentosan polysulfate. But many of these drugs, take a long time to act. Like Almiron, pentosan polysulfate takes a long time to act. There's evidence which says that it may not even act, right? So what I find is that when I go in, I try to give acute treatment to reduce the inflammation, give medication for the urgency frequency, right? Because inflammation is causing the urgency frequency. So treat that also. But before that, give diet chart. I really have my patient on very strict diet chart. I have really found that, I have had patients who tell me that they're following the diet chart very well. I've actually had the food that they've had, because Indian food, how spicy it is. And they think that they are eating good food, but they're not, right? There's a lot of, diet really makes a difference. I can't begin to tell you how much.
Just sorry to interrupt you. Is Wrinkle your patient?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
I think you went to her home to see what she's eating.
Yeah, because she kept telling me I'm following the rules, and I know some of my patients, I'm very anal with my patients, and so I couldn't believe that she was following everything because, so I actually went to her house and I had her soup and it was full of pepper, and spicy stuff. And of course, it's going to be bad for you, right? So I really sit down with my patient and explain the diet chart, right?
Yeah, ma'am, could you just take us through the diet chart also? It will be very nice.
Yes, I also give. In fact, if you want, I can email you all of you the diet chart that we follow, right? But there's a whole, and I think the American IC Society has done a very good job of putting it together. But basically, I'll give you. Firstly, there are 3 very important foods you have to not have. That is, one is, of course, alcohol. Just you cannot have alcohol at all, right? Ruchika, remember, knows no wine, right, Ruchika? So she comes and asks me whether I can have wine. I said, no, you can't do that, right? Then there is coffee. Anything with caffeine is very bad, right? Anything with caffeine. It's like, so I don't tell patients don't have caffeine. I tell them have a different kind of coffee or have a different kind of tea. Not that they're stopping their tea or coffee, they're having decaf ones. And herbal tea does not work because herbal tea will have different herbs that are not good for you. So don't try and having herbal tea as a, instead of normal tea. So even green tea does not work because green tea, and in fact, I will send you the whole list of foods with caffeine in it. I can send it to you, Belaka, and you can send it out to everybody.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. That will be very helpful. Yeah.
Anything with caffeine, cocoa, chocolates, a lot of our foods have all of that. So you cannot have that, right? Artificial sweetener, right? Artificial sweetener is a complete no-no. I had a patient who came with everything done correctly, but, was having artificial sweetener. No one picked it up. It's very bad. It can really destroy your bladder. Right? These are main 3 foods. Then citrus fruits. Everything with citrus is out. And that means your oranges, your, Musambi Santra, the Indian, then lemon, amchur powder, the mango, that amchur powder that you put in your food, that is out. I'm talking about the Indian spices, right? So I'm giving you all the Indian names for it. So all the acidic stuff is out. Then if you look at fruits, right? In fruits, unfortunately, mango is out. Mango is acidic, right? So citrus fruits are out. Then you can have banana. Banana isn't try it. Sorry, banana isn't try it. You can have apple. You can have blue.
Just a moment. We have another 10 minutes to go. So
okay.
Yeah.
Faster. Yeah.
So if anybody has any question, just fast ask. Please ask.
Yeah. So citrus fruits out. Papaya out. Onion, tomatoes out. Then in spices, Indian spices, you can have fresh coriander leaves. You cannot have dhania powder. You cannot have, pepper. You cannot have any. So all of those spices are out except fresh coriander leaves and jeera and haldi. And I've covered everything. In vegetables, you cannot have green capsicum.
Yeah,
that's out. And and the other stuff you can generally. I'm going to send you the entire day so you can have it. So follow a great diet. Then you should also I really stress on meditation. I really sit with my patients to go through how stress is really bad for you because stress releases inflammatory mediators. So I really put them on, good meditation class, make them go to a meditation class, do half an hour morning, half an hour evening. And there's also pelvic floor exercises I give them. If they have dysfunctional voiding, so many of them will go into not being able to pee because inflammation is causing spasm of the pelvic floor. So I put them on my whole relaxation exercises. Then medication. So medication, I will start them on pentosan polysulfate for 6 months. I tend to give pre-leaf. I've trained in Cleveland Clinic, and pre-leaf, I would get those bladder specific pre-leaf. Pre-leaf takes off the acidity of the food you eat. So half an hour before 10 minutes before your meal, you can have it lunch and dinner. You have pre-leaf. I might add a little bit of solifenacin or mirabegron, which are the urgency drugs. I would add that. Some patients who have got anxiety issues might get a little bit of amitriptyline, but for the acute treatment, I will do bladder installations. So I will do 10 installations twice a week and then give them a rest. right? And then, bladder installation are different combinations, but generally it's soda bicarb, heparin, gentamicin if they have got urinary tract infection, symptoms, any hydrocortisone, which is like a steroid.
Sorry to interrupt you once again. We have a question from Gail. She's from Canada.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, please.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for doing this. It's a quick. I hope it's a quick answer question because it's not related to food. But I have a patient who has a question. Can uroplasma found in the urine reinfect the vagina of the uroplasma? So if the vagina was cleared, but the bladder
Yes.
was eradicated, can urine reinfect the vagina from urinating?
No, absolutely not. Because if your vagina has, a good acid-base balance, basically never ensure that you're healthy, eating good foods, your vagina is healthy. If the vagina is healthy, it's got a good acid-base pH balance, it's going to ensure that you have good bacteria in it. When you have good bacteria in it, it's going to prevent any other infections coming in.
Okay.
So while urinating, you're not going to get the uroplasma into the vagina and infect it. No. And
Okay.
yes, obviously, if you are immunocompromised, if you have got cancer, if you've got, any other such condition and your acid-base pH balance of the vagina is really distorted, then it's a different condition altogether. But normally, healthy woman, no.
We
And
have
to answer the- I just want to finish. 1 second. I just want to tell it to 1 second. What's
Pratibha
that?
has a question. Pratibha has a
Somebody-
question.
Arun Dahiya. The problem with you was that treatment was done piecemeal. You have to have everything done together and then later on tapered off.
Actually, I have been following the diet. I have tried pelvic physiotherapy also, and bladder
But
installation.
was a bladder. You have to do diet chart, bladder installation,
Bladder
medication.
didn't work for me. I tried them several times.
But was it together? You cannot have 3 weeks of medication and then bladder installation and then sometimes else something else. Doesn't work like that. You have to do it together and then it works. And you need to work with the patient, Can we connect offline? Is it okay?
So
Yes.
Yeah. Next question. Yeah, sorry.
Next question is Pratibha. Can you ask your question fast?
Yeah, I had my cystoscopy a year back, maybe on December. Now I'm in 10 installation also and 10 physiotherapy also. And now I'm feeling urgency. And can you please tell me, do I need any other cystoscopy and installation should be done periodically or what?
So I see what happens with bladder pain syndrome is it keeps coming back. It's not a condition. You're not treating the cause of it. So you have to really be on a maintenance thing. Okay, so you undergo 10 installations. You are being given oral medication. You're doing the diet chart. Are you following the diet chart really well?
Yeah, I'm following all the diet charts
Very, very well.
by Karishma.
Yeah, because but even if but you must remember one
Yes,
thing. This
very, very well.
No, but this condition tends to have crests and troughs. Correct. So even if you've done everything correctly, the inflammation can come back. So you normally have to have a maintenance thing. So you do 10 installations and 6 months later you may do three, 4 installations. You just maintain it like that. You cannot think that, oh, I've done it once, it's going to be better forever. You have to come back and keep on following up. So I tell all my patients come back monthly to me because you have to keep a watch.
So those who have other questions, you can email me or Arun, and then we can forward it to ma'am, and then you can get those answers.
I can have another call with you all also. I'm very happy to have
Another
that.
call also we can arrange.
I'm
Yeah.
very happy.
Yeah. So last question. Anybody has a question? Yes, Gail. Gail, please.
Oh no, I'm fine. Sorry, that was the last one.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. No more questions, it seems. So ma'am,
I have a question.
Okay. Yes.
Ruchika.
The fast. We have only 3 minutes.
Yeah. Doc, in this lockdown, do you suggest any do's and don'ts for us, considering it is a more stressful situation and do you have any do's and don'ts for chronic illnesses like us? Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, stress reduction. Do everything to keep your mind under control, right? Absolutely, because stress is one of the worst. It really leads to a flare up. So stress reduction is extremely, extremely important. Follow your diet, really hard to follow the food diet because it's not, it's very difficult to get the right kind of foods, in the markets now. So ensure that you get a proper diet. Stay in touch with the doctor. People like me are always available. I mean, IC is a condition where I tell Ruchita this: you're my friend for life. And, everybody. If you want
She
to
indeed is. She indeed is.
so it's like, and so I'm always available. I mean, for our bladder pain syndrome patients, I'm sure all your doctors are like that. Like, we're always available because we know how tough this condition is. So you can WhatsApp, these are patients who are on WhatsApp with me because, because I realize that anxiety kind of leads to a whole spiral. So before it comes, you have to attack it, right? And so that's when reassuring words from the doctor.
What I'll do is I'll just send another Zoom request and maybe we can continue with this meeting. Is that okay with others? Others, would you like to continue this meeting? Then I'll just send a new request. Ma'am, you continue. I'll just send the new request.
Yeah. So really, stress reduction, I can't begin tell you, meditation. I mean, I know it's very difficult to do meditation, but if we can use this time for learning that, the stress reduction will be so much more, right? So meditation, pelvic floor relaxation exercises. If you want, I can send you all the 4 videos. I give giving to everybody. The 4 videos that my Ruchita must be having it. Have it,
Yeah,
right? So,
I do. Yeah, I do.
These are very nice videos on how to do pelvic floor relaxation. These are breathing exercises, and these are reverse Kegel exercises where your pelvic floor learns to kind of relax. Because bladder pain syndrome has multiple features to it: the inflammation, the pelvic floor spasm, correct? And then it can create trigger points. So all of them act together. So under your control is to exercise properly, do stress reduction, follow diet, and go to the doctor. And don't take application without doctor's advice.
Just give me a moment. Yes, just give me a moment. I'm just sending another request to all of you.
Just go in. You send it to my WhatsApp.
Yeah, sending you on WhatsApp.